Hello, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Early Childhood Education Public Lecture Series organized by the Singapore University of Social Sciences. My name is Aletheia, and I am an Early Childhood faculty member at SUSS. With pleasure, we continue with this online series of lectures over the course of this year, 2024, featuring both local and overseas academics and researchers. There will be interactive moments over the chat space during the lecture. We are having sound off so as not to disrupt the talk that's being recorded. However, at the end of the session, there will be time for questions and comments as we finish off the talk. Today, we are delighted to have Rebecca Parlakian bring us her invigorating expertise on early STEM curriculum. She is with us from across the world, all the way in Washington, D.C. in the US. Rebecca is Senior Director of Programs at 023, and she has created 5 early childhood and parenting curricula across her career, including the one we will hear about today, namely Problem Solvers. She holds a master's degree in early childhood special education and served as faculty at George Washington University for 10 years following. In fact, Rebecca's first day of graduate school was the same day her son had his first day at kindergarten. Her 2 children are now young adults. Her 2 dogs, Bear and Louie, are 2 on top of 15 dogs she has fostered. And her hobby is baking and trying new recipes for cakes, pies, cookies, and moussey goodness. Her favorite dessert, like mine, is any kind of cake. So, Rebecca, you are a fine example that learning is lifelong and that journey is embedded in everyday moments. You've been focusing on early STEM topics for the last 10 years, and I'm excited to hear you tell us how to have fun with STEM with your strategies for nurturing the next generation of problem solvers. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for such a warm welcome. I am so honored to be here. I've been a child development and parenting specialist for almost 25 years now, and my special interest has been in early STEM over the last decade, and I'm thrilled and honored to join you. But when I do a talk like this, I always want to honor and acknowledge the fact that I am in a virtual room of experts. And so I really hope that this talk can be really a conversation, because I'd love to hear your reflections, your questions, and most of all, your ideas and lessons learned and best practices as I share my own. So with that, I will just jump right in. How about I go ahead and share my screen? Okay. Is that working for everyone? Can you see? Great. All right, well, I'll just begin by kind of talking briefly about what you can expect today. So first, I'm going to kind of define how we have been thinking about early math, science, and engineering and very young children. We have focused our work on ages 2.5 to 4, although our pilot of the curriculum has indicated that the activities remain engaging for children up through age 5. But we wrote it for 2.5 to 4-year-olds. And I also want to acknowledge that we have not yet worked to include the technology piece of STEM. So we'll be focusing primarily on math, science, and engineering today. I'm going to be, as we work through our talk today, I'm going to be suggesting and sharing some examples of what we believe to be engaging play-based STEM experiences. And I would love for you to jump in and either build on those ideas or share your own, because I think this is such a wonderful opportunity for educators to come together and, for us to learn and build on one another's ideas and approaches. And finally, I'm going to go through 10 instructional strategies that we really used as our roadmap and guideposts as we were developing this curricula. Also, I wanted to spotlight the amazing children that you're going to see throughout this presentation. I think every photo of children but one are photos of children from our pilot sites, because every activity that we wrote was piloted at 7 early childhood programs across the US to ensure that everything we wrote not only was fun, engaging, and worthwhile for children, but most of all, that it was doable for teachers. And so the activity that you see in this picture is our activity called Tree Observations, where the teacher is prompted to take children outside to sit under a tree. And the children have magnifying glasses. They're encouraged to look at the leaves, to touch the tree bark, to really take the perspective of a scientist, of observing exactly what a tree looks and feels like. And then they're given clipboards to do a drawing, to do a, we say, draw what you see, draw the tree. And you can see this little girl is hard at work at that. And then when they come back to the classroom, they use their scientific drawing, and the teacher provides a set of open-ended materials. And the group builds a model of a tree based on what they have seen and then what they have drawn. And so you can see that we're using observation skills. We're carefully looking at a tree in the way that a scientist does. And then we are moving from a symbol, a drawing, to another symbol, a model that a scientist would create. And so when we think about engaging age-appropriate STEM, this is our first example. So I don't know about many of you, but perhaps you told some folks in your life, oh, I'm doing a lecture this morning on early STEM instruction. And they might have said, early STEM instruction, 2.5 to 4-year-olds? How can that be? And so I wanted to share this slide, and I think the lotus is such a great metaphor here, because we know the roots of a lotus are in kind of the muddy ground, under the water, right? And those roots hold it in place. And we have to sort of understand what is in the roots of our culture around early learning. And so there was a really interesting study done in the United States about STEM instruction. And the study was essentially researchers standing on a busy sidewalk, just stopping people and doing brief interviews to get a sense of what beliefs we held as a culture about STEM. And 3 primary findings came out of that man on the street interviewing. First, when people were asked, what does STEM mean for young children? What do you think they said? Of course, counting. STEM is counting. Well, what we're going to talk about is STEM is so much more than counting. And even in the subject of math is such a fascinating subject because there are so many subdomains and so many entry points for children. Secondly, people felt or believed that science was for later on, like when kids start formal schooling. And engineering, that's for teenagers or college students. That's not for young children at all. And finally, people believe that children learn STEM best through a back to basics approach, rote, teacher-directed learning. And it's not that that approach is bad, but it's that we know for very young children, they learn by doing, exploring, touching, squishing. And so that rote and directive approach may not be the best fit for young children's developmental age and stage. So what happens as a result of these cultural beliefs? First, what happens as a result of these cultural beliefs is that an observational study in the United States found that STEM instruction occurred in preschool only about 7% of the day. What a missed opportunity, right? Because we know that children are coming to us in wonder of the world around them and driven with curiosity about what is making the world work. What is a butterfly? Why are leaves falling? What makes the rain come out of the sky? They come to us with curiosity and passion for science, engineering, and math. And it's our job to turn that spark into a fire. So what happens when we do? When preschool teachers do deliver, in this case, in this study, STEAM activities with the art added, there was phenomenal high levels of engagement from children. And that's because children are not just ready, but hungry for these topics in ways that meet them where they are developmentally. So, full disclosure, just wanted to share that I am going to be offering examples from a curriculum that I've been working on and co-authoring over the last 2 years. The math component of the curriculum, the first 22 activities, is currently available for a free download at the 0to3.org Problem Solvers website at the top. And the next 22 activities that will encompass science and engineering will be available in September because that's the back to school month in the United States. The curriculum is aligned to early STEM objectives. We'll be talking a bit about that. It's grounded in play, and it's also holistic. We offer small group learning activities. We have partnered with an early music educator and have an original song for each unit. We also suggest a children's book for each unit with an extension activity. And we also have a parent-child take-home resource that can be sent home with children. So we really think of it as a holistic curriculum with many entry points for young children. So as I mentioned, I'd like to define how we're thinking about early math. And as I mentioned earlier, math is fascinating, right? Because it's not just counting. It falls under number sense. Number sense also includes the skill of subitizing, which is recognizing a quantity without having to count it. And it also includes cardinality, which is understanding that the last number you've counted is the total quantity of the set. Early math also means early calculations. We know that children are constantly combining sets and taking items away from sets. That's sort of organic addition and subtraction. But with some scaffolding and structure, we can really give children entry points into doing early calculations. Shape awareness. Shape awareness is not just being able to name and recognize a shape. It's being able to understand the attributes that are assigned to each shape. So knowing that something is a square because it has 4 straight sides of the same length and 4 pointy corners. And so the activities we've designed for shape awareness give children lots of opportunities to really touch and explore shapes so that they can understand for themselves from a tactile perspective, what are the attributes of these shapes? Building on that idea of noticing attributes, that takes us into sets and sorting, because we sort objects into sets based on attributes that they share. And helping children learn to recognize these attributes is an important early math skill. They will use it later on in geometry. And we're going to be doing a sorting activity later today together. And then patterns, we're learning from research, is a really important foundational math skill for children. And so our curriculum gives children a few different entry points into patterns. One activity is a color pattern, creating color patterns. And we focus on A-B patterns because those are kind of appropriate for this age. An A-B pattern includes 2 components like red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. We also do an activity that focuses on sound patterns. And then we do an activity that focuses on making patterns with objects. So we're trying to really help children understand that patterns can be created in many different ways. Finally, measurement. Measurement is such a complex and symbolic topic. You may wonder, how on earth do we address this with very young children? Well, we focus on two aspects of measurement in this curriculum that we felt were most appropriate for older toddlers and preschoolers. And that is the attribute of length, long and short, and the attribute of volume, although we talk about full and empty in a water play activity. So that's how we've defined the domains of early math for very young children. And in terms of science, we focus on 4 content areas: physical sciences, and an example of an activity from there is ice melting, having children do a structured exploration of ice melting. Life sciences, we have several activities around planting seeds, exploring plants, learning the names of plants, the tree activity. Earth and space sciences, so some examples from this area include a weather activity and exploring the seasons. And then engineering design, an example from our engineering set of activities. The key with engineering is we want to give children a problem they can solve using math and science knowledge that they possess. And so we had a lot of fun thinking up age-appropriate problems. One example is shade structures. So teams of children, we usually like to do things in pairs, are given a little toy figurine. And they're told that their job is to use open-ended materials like boxes and coffee filters and paper towels and masking tape and tissue paper, whatever the teacher might have in the room. Their job is to construct a structure that would protect their little figurine from the sun. So they build that structure with their partner, and then at the end of the activity, they're given a flashlight to test whether their structure works at protecting their figure from the sun. And they are given the opportunity to what we call make it better or improve or iterate their engineering design. I do want to acknowledge, though, that science is not just a set of domains of knowledge. Science is also a way of thinking. So each of our science activities, we've been very explicit about the scientific thinking skills that we're working on. And they include the ones that you see here on this slide. And I think it's really important to pause here and go back to that earlier point that we don't have to make children learn STEM. We already have scientists and engineers coming into our classrooms. I'd like to hear from you all. How many of you have had children in your classroom asking questions, making predictions, making observations, exploring cause and effect, right? We see these behaviors every day. And it's really our job, again, to give children these rich and challenging pathways to deepen their knowledge and understanding of concepts they're already curious about. So now I'm going to jump into our 10 instructional practices. Each of these practices is based on research that we did about best practices in STEM teaching. Most of the articles focused on elementary. In the US, we call it elementary for children age 5 to 10, and then middle and high school, so 11 to 18. We looked at these practices for the older children, and then we kind of selected those practices that we felt were most applicable to our younger children. And we ended up with 10 practices that each describe a specific teacher action that are appropriate for early childhood settings that we're defining as 2.5 to 4 years old, and that embody the developmental abilities of that age range. So let's jump in. As a teacher myself, I think it's really important that we begin with us, right? And teacher reflection is really critical for child learning. When we take time to think about the meaning of what we've observed, if we take time to think about what are children really interested in right now, what are they asking about? When we take time to think about, what needs does that particular child have so that they can more easily participate in the activity, right? We become better instructors, and we also design more impactful activities and curricula for our classrooms. But teacher reflection can be tricky, and I think promoting teacher reflection in communities like this one, where we can share ideas and questions in the chat, where we can have our conversation at the end in the Q&A, it's so critical for improving our own practice as professionals. And so I did want to start with us. Along those lines, I'm going to share a video now of teachers reflecting on their use of the Problem Solvers curriculum, sharing the things that they took away from their experience in teaching. And as we watch, I'd love for you to think about an observation that you have of a child or a moment that you saw a child, maybe a child in your family, a student that you're teaching, when you saw them exploring math, science, or engineering. And I'd like you to kind of be prepared to share that reflection in the chat if you feel comfortable. But I'll start the video now.
So it hasn't as much changed the way that I've thought of math instruction as it has supported and kind of enhanced the idea that students really just have to have something tangible when they're learning, and to really have that group, that collaboration through math as well.
0 to 3 has expanded my thinking of math with 3-year-olds beyond just counting, rote counting, or even recognizing numbers, but looking at patterns, looking at quantity, looking at positional words.
Once I do that, know the song with them, it's math time. And if I let them touch, participate, oh, they're loving the activities.
They're very curious, so as long as you're doing something that's interested to them, or you make it very interested, they're going to be right there with you.
Problem Solvers has helped me to realize how important math concepts are in real life and in everyday, looking outside, looking at nature, engaging children in what they see around them.
I hear them counting other things, or I see them making patterns with different blocks, or we have sorting. Like one day at snack, they sorted all the colors of the Fruit Loops.
My students are able to pick up on shapes in the hallway. They'll notice the squares, tiles. They'll notice those things. They've noticed patterns in the hallway. And so it's so exciting to see them just kind of realize it's kind of a brightness that comes into their world when they start noticing and making those connections.
A couple of my parents were really interested, and they would come back with something new that their child did at home.
One little boy came up to me and told me that he heard a bird when they were outside playing, and so he was listening for patterns and told his mom about the patterns that he had heard. So just kind of exciting to hear them talk about their learning.
I think using Problem Solvers curriculum is a great way for teachers that are a little hesitant on having hands-on activities as opposed to like a paper pencil.
I think the biggest piece of advice I would give another teacher who wants to use math with 3-year-olds is to be intentional. Make it an intentional time, make it a fun time. And that's what Problem Solvers was able to do for me, is to make it an intentional time that I had to sit and think this out and get my kids to think mathematically.
So I'd love to hear your reflections on how you've seen children exploring math, science, and engineering in the community around you, in your classrooms. Feel free to drop those reflections in the chat, and we'll kind of loop back to them as we move through. But, as you can see, some of the themes that came out of the teacher's work And it's interesting, this pilot program happened in South Carolina, which is a state in the American South. And I forgot that they have kind of a Southern accent, a different accent. So I'm glad we had the captioning. It might have been hard to understand. But some of the themes that we heard from them is that children were really looking for tangible things to hold and do. And that's something we're going to come back to. Another theme that we heard was the importance of collaboration among children and giving children opportunities to work together, which is something that we'll come back to as well. And then finally, our last reflection takes us back to where we started, which is this idea of intentionality as teaching professionals, of really creating the time and the opportunity for children to explore STEM in a play-based but structured way in our classrooms. Practice that I'd like to touch on today is how important it is to create rigorous opportunities for STEM learning. I know we're working with young children, but even so, we can create opportunities that are challenging. And the way we start that process of design is by using age-appropriate objectives to understand what we can expect from a 2.5 to 4-year-old. Now, our curriculum was written for 3-year-olds, and then we give guidance on how to increase the challenge level for 4s or decrease the challenge level for your 2.5s. You can also use these suggestions if you have children with just differential needs. But understanding what's age appropriate is important. And so in our teacher's guide for the curriculum, we've outlined what all of our objectives are for this curriculum. So you'll be able to see what the math objectives are, what the science and engineering objectives are, so that if you're sitting down to design curricula, you have something to work from, which is really important. I know that within Singapore, you also have the Nurturing Early Learners framework, which I think is also a fantastic resource to get a sense of how to design, how to design activities to a particular age-appropriate objective. And we also want to design experiences that prompt children to do deep thinking about STEM. And I'm going to give you some examples about that shortly. The next one I'm going to touch on, though, is this idea of, if you remember in the Lotus slide that I did, talking about how STEM was only 9% of the preschool day. How do we increase the dose, right? And the way we do that is by embedding STEM vocabulary and concepts across the curriculum. So STEM is not just a 15-minute activity. STEM is that activity, it's vocabulary and conversations we're having with children across the day, across the week. It's STEM-based literature that we're sharing with children during story time. It is opportunities for music and movement that we're providing children that, again, are using that vocabulary and reinforcing those concepts. So we really need to think about how do we build STEM in throughout everything that we're doing, because we can support literacy outcomes using a STEM children's book, right? So we're trying to think about that with intention. But this idea of deep thinking about STEM, I'd like you to look at the photo, and it might be kind of hard to see what's going on, but it's 2 little girls, and they have a cardboard box on the table. And inside the cardboard box is a piece of red felt, and on the outside, they're taping some craft leaves. And this activity is for a science unit called Habitats, where we introduce the idea of a habitat, that it's where an animal can access air, food, water, and shelter, or a place to be safe. And as the activity, we talk to children about the habitat needs of a field mouse. And then we have children using open-ended materials like you see there. We have them use that new knowledge to build a habitat for a field mouse. And then when they're done, we go through the checklist again. Does the habitat have an entrance for the field mouse? Does it have an exit in case he needs to get away? Does it have a soft place where he can curl up and sleep? Is there a place where he can find food and water? So we really invite children to think deeply about this and plan and collaborate. Another example is an engineering activity that we call Waking Walter. Now, many of you who might have engineers in your lives may have heard of the engineering design process, which is kind of a complex process, but our colleagues at the Museum of Science in Boston have distilled the engineering design process to 3 steps for preschoolers. The first step is to explore. So in Waking Walter, what we do is we ask the teacher to get a puppet or a stuffed animal who we're going to name Walter. Walter is going to go to a birthday party in the morning and he's really excited, but he needs to wake up on time and he's afraid he won't. So the children have to help Walter solve his problem by making a noisemaker to wake up Walter. So the first step is that children explore open-ended materials. We have a number of materials. We have several different kinds of containers, and we have a range of materials, some of which make sounds like bells or dried rice, and some of which are silent like pom-poms. So they can explore these materials, and then they create a solution to the problem. They build a noisemaker to wake up Walter. And then we have them go around in a circle and tell their peers how they built the noisemaker. What did they use and what did it sound like? And we give them an opportunity to engage in step 3 to test and improve their noisemaker. Did they see something their peer did that looked like a good idea? Did they want to change the container they used? So we're really prompting children through this age-appropriate problem to iterate around the engineering process. And then a final example is we have an activity called What is the Wind? And you can see that the content we're trying to teach is to define wind as air in motion. We want children to understand that air is all around us, even if we can't see it, and that the force of wind can move things. So if those are the 3 objectives of this lesson, what's a learning experience you might design for young children? Would anyone like to share an idea? You can drop it in the chat. Well, I will keep my eye on the chat, and I know Aletheia is going to be my partner on the chat. Oh, I think Joyce, kite flying. Rebecca Chan suggested kite flying. Yeah, that's a great idea. And you can have children make the kites, and it can be a whole activity. And I'm not sure, did Joycelyn, Ms. Yeo, did she want to come off mute and share? Oh, someone said a mini windmill. I love those. Blowing bubbles. 3 states of matter, yes. So these are all beautiful ways of giving children very interactive experiences with the wind. In our activity, wind chimes, that's a great one too, because they're using their own breath or they're using the wind outside to create the chime. We did a 2-part activity for this one, where the first part of the activity is that we placed a range of materials on the table, and then we asked the teacher to select a wind machine, which would either be a small fan or a blow dryer, a hair dryer, and we would ask children to predict whether each object could be blown by the wind. And it would be objects like a feather, a children's book, a paper bag, other things, right? A tissue, a rock. And children would have to predict, could this be moved by the wind? And then they would actually test it using the fan. They would test each object and take data to see whether their prediction was correct. The second part of the activity was kind of along the lines of what you're suggesting here with blowing bubbles. We actually suggest that the teacher put some liquid watercolors on the paper, and children blow through the straw so that the watercolors move across the paper. And children discover that depending on where they stand or where they aim the straw, the watercolors move in different directions. So the wind can come in different directions. And when the wind is coming from a different direction, the water will move in a different direction too. So that's how we approached it in this lesson. But I just want to kind of point out and lift up what amazing creativity and great activity ideas we're also seeing in the chat. So, for those of you who may be interested in doing a wind activity, be doing some screenshots here or taking notes, because these are all fantastic ideas. The instructional practice for the third instructional practice I'm going to cover is probably something I don't need to talk to tell preschool teachers, which is that for young children, the mind needs the body. Children from 2.5 to 4 do not learn well just sitting at a table, right? They learn by lifting, doing, touching, moving, dropping, pushing, exploring, right? So when we were designing the activities in this curriculum, and I really encourage you to think about this as you design yours, is how do we build physical movement into all of our STEM learning experiences? And I'll give you a couple of examples. So in the United States, we have these huge garbage trucks that come down our streets, come into the parking lots of our child care programs or early education programs. And the big back of the truck opens up, and it's loud, and it's, a very impressive truck. So this is an important and pertinent routine for a lot of American children. And so our activity is that in the curriculum, you can actually print out the image of this garbage can. And we have the teacher print out a number of these garbage cans. And the activity focuses on helping children learn spatial words, because part of spatial awareness, which is the very early beginnings of geometry, is being able to describe the location of an object precisely. And that means that children understand descriptive words like over, next to, under, behind. So what we do in this activity is the teacher places these little garbage cans all around the room, and then each children wears a garbage truck around their neck, and they get to pretend to be a garbage truck, and the teacher gives them clues about where the garbage cans are hidden. So you, Aletheia, get to find the garbage can that's under the rocking chair. And Cynthia, you find the garbage can that is behind the door. And let's see, Joycelyn, I want you to find the garbage can that is on top of the bookshelves. And so children are moving around the room collecting their garbage cans. And then we have them work in pairs, and they hide the garbage can for their partner and use a spatial term to give their partner a clue about where to find it. So again, a very simple activity, but what teachers told us is that many children were not familiar with these spatial words, and it gave them a really fun, age-appropriate entry point for practicing that skill. Another example is a number line activity in our math curriculum. We call it Animals on Parade, and we ask teachers to create a number line on the floor. Based on what age you're teaching, the number line can go to 5, it can go to 10, it can go to 15, depending on, again, we're individualizing, right, as teachers. What the children do for the Animals on Parade is first, they create sets of animals for each number on the number line, as you see in this picture. Then we create sets of children. Then the children hop along the number line as they chant the sequence. And what teachers told us is that children loved this activity so much, they kept the number line on the floor and they made it a free play activity because children just kept gravitating to it. It was so satisfying for them to make these sets. And in fact, we even were lucky enough to catch this picture. 2 little girls on the playground during recess, they were given chalk to draw on the ground during recess. They didn't draw little people, they didn't draw rainbows. They drew a number line and they told their teacher, we're making a number line. And you can see that they sort of understood. It's a line, there are hatch marks. And so when we talk about embedding STEM across the curriculum, this is the kind of magic that we want to see, right? Instructional practice I'd love to touch base on is this idea of finding the just right challenge. And this is all about individualizing and making sure that every activity that we design for children has a way to make it just right for where they are developmentally. And this is important for me as a special educator because we know that children are joining our classroom. Some are quite advanced, but some have some challenges with learning, and we want to be able to create entry points for all children to develop STEM skills. So some of the ways we do this, I'm going to give an example from our sorting activity. If you remember the sorting activity, we focus on helping children tune in to attributes. So this activity can be adjusted to make the attributes to create sets that are either very obvious in terms of attributes or more subtle in terms of attributes. But the activity itself, I'm just going to deliver to you right now. It's a sorting game that we play with cards. So the teacher's going to print out these cards and place them on the table. And since the idea of attributes is a little tricky to use with little kids, what we normally say when we introduce this activity is we're going to sort these cards, and I'm going to use a secret sorting rule, and you have to guess my sorting rule, okay? And so we're all going to play it right now. And once you all have guessed my sorting rule, you have to drop it in the chat, okay? Got it? All right, let's play. Guess my rule. All right, my first card is the giraffe card. He's in this group. And the doggy is in this group. Now let's think. I'm not sorting by legs because they both have 4 legs and they both have tails, so I'm not sorting by tails. Guess my rule. What is my sorting rule? Well, the owl goes with the giraffe. An owl is a bird though. And the cardinal goes with the dog. Well, the cardinal and the owl are both birds, so my rule is not birds. Guess my sorting rule. My next card is the elephant. Who wants to guess where the elephant goes? I think Jana Mobin got it. The elephant goes over here, and the frog, where does he go? Yes, spots or no spots. The frog goes over here. So we kind of scaffold children's ability to tune into attributes, right? And then we place the cards on the table again. And we say to children, how else might we sort these cards? And why is that important? It's important because I don't know if you've noticed this in your classroom, but sometimes once children have sorted by one attribute like color, they get stuck on that attribute and they can't sort a different way. So right around age 3, children begin to develop what we call cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to kind of ignore one attribute and look for a different shared attribute. So we prompt children, what is another way to sort? And looking at this chat, you guys are amazing. You've identified so many different ways that we could sort these animals. We could sort them by size. We can sort them whether they fly or not. We could sort them by number of feet. We could sort by whether they have tails. We could sort them by wild or not wild. So many different ways to sort, right? But you know, it's a great activity for children, and we can do this both with cards, but we can also pull out toy cars. We can do this with all different kinds of objects in the world around children. With leaves, for example, if you're in a place that has a lot of leaves that are falling, you can pull out leaves and have children sort the leaves. So lots of different directions to go with this kind of activity. But in the curriculum, after each activity, we explicitly give teachers suggestions for how to make it more or less challenging. Because what research has shown, there was a survey that my colleague in Chicago did a few years ago that found that teachers feel pretty confident delivering STEM activities, but they aren't sure how to individualize them. They aren't sure how to modify them to differentiate to meet children's needs. And so we wanted to make that process easier. The next best practice I'd like to touch on is this idea of who am I? And we're developing an understanding of ourselves in many different ways in early childhood. Am I a good kid? Am I a smart kid? Am I the kind of kid people want to be friends with? One of the identity elements that we are building in early childhood is, am I a STEM kid, right? And we know that these early learning settings are really powerful for identity formation because we as educators can either provide or deny access and communications to children that tell them, we see you as a scientist, an engineer, a mathematician. This identity formation starts early, and we take that identity with us as we enter school, and it can affect our school achievement for years. And so we want to build a strong STEM identity from the start. Just a side note, this picture is from one of our activities around exploring plants, where we have children actually take plants out of a planter and really look at and touch the roots. So many children nowadays have not touched roots before. So really, again, this whole tactile nature of the experience. So practice 5 is really intentionally cultivating a positive STEM identity among your students. How do we do this? We ask children about their experiences with a particular STEM topic. So in this picture, Mohammed is loving, really enjoying playing with a tabletop ramp. So we can ask Mohammed, ramps look a little bit like slides. Have you ever been on a slide at the playground? Tell me about what happened when you went on the slide. How does the slide work? So by tapping into children's knowledge and lived experiences, first of all, we learn what they know. And second of all, we communicate to them that your knowledge is valuable to me. We also can use the accurate STEM language, the vocabulary, even if it's challenging vocabulary, we can use it with our young children. And we can reference these concepts across the day in our interactions with children so that children understand that science and math is relevant to their lives, right? It's not just a subject, it's something we live and use throughout the day. And then finally, we can lift children up as scientific thinkers by prompting them to share their thinking or show me how you did that. We want to communicate that we value their thinking. Next, as you heard in the video of reflections, the importance of teamwork and collaboration. We know that children don't just learn from teachers, children learn from other children too. And in fact, our pilot sites that used mixed age groups told us that the 4 and 5-year-olds would often partner with and mentor the 3-year-olds. So we really saw this angel effect of older children supporting younger children. And so as you design STEM experiences, really encourage you, as we did, to design a collaborative element to each activity, to prompt children to answer questions, to discuss what they're doing, what they're thinking about. And again, giving children an opportunity to build on what they're seeing their peers doing and sharing. In this picture, you see a group of children around a paper where they've drawn rectangles. So what the heck is this? Well, it's an engineering activity called Building Together. And what the teacher has done is offer children a selection of different sized cardboard boxes. And she's asked the children to work together to plan what they will build. And then they have to draw the plan. So this requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of self-regulation. And for some children, that's going to be tricky at this age, right? And I just want to point out that just like children don't stop learning STEM when the STEM activity is over, children are also learning social emotional skills during the STEM activity. You know, all of the learning happening in the early years is cross-domain, right? So collaborative experiences promote those early social emotional skills. And so here the children are writing their plan, and then they have to take their plan and build it in 3D. So there's a lot of symbolic thinking going on there as well. Another way that we nurture collaboration in the curriculum is through games, board games and card games. And these are so simple to create in your classroom. And I hope that the ideas that I give here kind of spark your own ideas about how you can build games. But we do a lot of games and problem solvers. And this one is a math game that helps children bridge subitizing, which is recognizing quantities without counting, to actual counting. And this is Nellie the Hen. And Nellie has a lot of eggs in her nest. So what the game is each children gets a nest that they put in front of them, and there's a stack of cards. And the children, each child picks a card, and oh, I got the 3-egg card. And so now I have to count out 3 eggs from a little pile that I have next to me and put them in my nest. 1, 2, 3. And then the next child pulls a card, 2, and then we all put our 2 eggs down, and then 1, and then we put our egg on there. And so the children take turns going around until they've all filled their nest. Now you can individualize and only fill up 3 spaces, or you can individualize and use 2 nests and go up to 12, right? Based on where your kids are. And another example of collaboration is our ramp activities. So we have 3 ramp activities, and all of them are partner activities. The first, now a ramp is, of course, as you know, a simple machine. And children are fascinated with ramps. And so the first activity, they just explore the ramp. How does it work? If I change the angle of the ramp, what happens? So exploration is first. Next is experimentation. What rolls down a ramp by itself? What doesn't move down a ramp? Can I move it down the ramp a different way by pushing it or sliding it? And so we want children to recognize that only things with curved edges move down a ramp by themselves. The final activity in the ramp series is children have to build something, a structure or something, to stop a ball as it rolls off the ramp. And so that's kind of the final piece of the ramp series. And again, collaborating in a small group to do that. The 7th instructional practice is about normalizing errors. I think STEM fields and STEM subjects at school, notoriously, it's right or wrong. But for early childhood, it's not about getting the right answer. It's about making sure children have the right wiring in their brain for this early foundation of concepts. Because STEM concepts build on one another. So if there's a misunderstanding, we want to get underneath that and figure out how we can support learning. The way we do that is, first of all, we normalize that even grown-up scientists and engineers have to often try again and again and again and again before they figure out the answer. So we can be problem solvers and just keep trying. Then we can ask children to share their thinking. Show me how you did that. Tell me how you figured that out. I'd love to hear more about that. and we're going to listen and observe for misunderstandings. And then we can either model a different approach, we can scaffold or coach the child through the challenge, or we can design additional activities or pathways to help them master that skill. And so normalizing errors is critical for us as professionals so that we can design the experiences children need to master those early concepts. So let's watch this short video. And as we watch it, this little boy is about 4, and you're going to hear him make a lot of mistakes about early math. But he also has a lot of math knowledge. So when you hear or see some excellent knowledge that he has right now that you would like to build on as an educator, I'd love for you to drop it in the chat, okay? So let's watch.
So I'm going to make 2 rows of quarters. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? Okay, now watch. Now, does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
That one has more quarters.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does that one have more quarters?
Because it's stretched out.
Because it's stretched out?
Yes.
Okay, so how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So, are there more in this row, or are they the same?
The same.
The same?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we have 2 sticks. Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? What about now? Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
That stick is longer.
The stick is longer?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because you moved it over.
So now it's longer.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me. I'm going to pour blue water into each of these cups, and you're going to have to tell me when they have the same amount, okay? Okay, tell me when this one is the same.
The same.
The same? Those 2 are the same now?
Yeah.
Okay. They're the same? Good?
The way they're the same.
Good. Okay, now watch this. We're going to take the blue water from this glass, and we're going to pour it into this glass. Now, does this glass have more water? Does this glass have more water, or are they the same?
Has more water.
This one has more water?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because that one's higher than that one.
That one's higher than that one.
So I'm going to stop it there. So we did see a lot of mistakes in the notion of conservation, if you know Piaget. But it really was around measurement, right, and comparisons. But he did have a lot of great foundational knowledge, right? So as Jill said in the chat, great prerequisite activities for length and volume, right? Giving him lots of opportunities to explore. And he was willing, when the teacher prompted him to count out the coins, he recognized, oh, even though the line is longer, they are still the same. They still have 5, right? And he also, when the teacher moved the stick over, he did have that knowledge that something is longer if it extends beyond something else, right? So his foundational knowledge was, he had some good ideas that he was building from. And the last one with the water, I mean, adults get fooled with that too, right? When you go and you order a soda and they deliver it in that tall, thin glass with ice, and you realize you've probably only gotten that much, right? So, but he, to measure them, he used his hand as a tool. He recognized that if the volume is higher, then it must, be greater. So he did have great foundational knowledge. And so that's the importance of observation and reflection, is understanding what we're seeing so that we can build on it and take children to the next level. And that's what we tried to do in our curriculum because we're using length as an attribute. What we ask teachers to do is cut ribbons in a variety of lengths and let children just kind of explore them for a little bit. And then we ask the teacher to choose 2 ribbons and place them like this and say, problem solvers, I have a problem. What can I do to figure out which ribbon is longer? And probably eventually a child will suggest, well, you need to put them next to each other, or they might try to position them for you. So we ask the teacher to kind of position them in the way that the researcher did in the video. And then say, well, now can we tell which ribbon is longer? And eventually we try to scaffold children to suggest that we begin at the same place to compare the ribbons, because we know that measuring with precision means that we begin at the same starting place. And so we get to this point, and then we discover, well, do we know which one is longer now? Yes, it's the top one. And then in the curriculum, we racked our brains about how do we give children the experience of measuring? Because we know that a centimeter, it has no conceptual meaning for young children. We all just kind of agreed on it, right? So we thought, what is a material that's in almost every early childhood classroom that's easy for children to manipulate and that they can easily move and replace if they make a mistake? And we came up with Post-it notes as a non-traditional measurement tool. So we have children put Post-it notes down to measure how long the ribbons are. And then we say, this one is 6 Post-its long. This is 5 Post-its long. This 6 is bigger than 5. This one is longer. And then if you want to scaffold, you can say, how many more Post-its do we need to have them be the same length? And then we've brought in early calculations, right? So in a very simple activity like this, children learned about length as an attribute. They learned how to measure with precision. They observed and compared and described the length of 2 objects. And they also used a non-traditional measurement tool and possibly did some early calculations from a very simple activity. And then for instructional practices 8 and 9, they're all about integrating STEM across the curriculum and grounding learning with students' lived experiences. So I'm going to go through each of these and talk about why these principles are useful. I'm going to use our bones unit as an example. In the bones unit, children discover the bones inside their bodies, and one of the activities is to match animals up with their animal X-ray. And the second activity is to create a model of a bone wrapped in skin. It's not scary or creepy. I'll show you an example. So we start every activity out with a group discussion, and we give you some suggested discussion questions. Now, this is not a morning talk show. We don't expect you to ask every question. You select the ones that work best for your group. But questions like, have you seen a bone? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Do you think all animals have bones or just humans? What do you think is important about bones? So we're really tapping into what children know and are curious about. And then we want to give children, as I mentioned, we partnered with an early music educator. She composed songs for every unit that use the rich vocabulary of the unit and that have suggested movement activities. So children are listening to the music, moving their bodies. And here is an example of the lyrics. At our knees, we have patellas. They help our knees bend. They're really good fellas. Now, you know, the knee bone, it's the patella. And we use words like patella and phalanges in the activity. And you might think, wow, for 2.5 to 4-year-olds, but young children love to know the real names of things. And so you'll find that they really enjoy it. And you can see this little girl is very proud of her bone model. She used popsicle sticks wrapped with Play-Doh to show how bones are inside our skin. Now, for every unit in the curriculum, I also wanted to mention all of the songs are also available for free download. So that's part of the option. For every unit in the curriculum, we've identified what we see as an example of high quality literature. Some are fiction, some are nonfiction. This is a nonfiction book about bones. And we give you some suggestions for questions you can ask children as you read. So the experience is more of a dialogue. We know from the research on the approach of dialogic reading that the more we engage in conversation around literature, the more that children build their expressive language skills and their vocabularies. And then for every book, we have a suggested extension activity. For this book, the extension activity is for the teacher to cut out bone shapes from cardboard and to hide them in a sensory bin or sandbox for children to find, pretending to be an archaeologist using a brush or a spoon. We also suggest ways to talk about the key vocabulary and concepts across the day. So for bones, you might at mealtime talk about how healthy eating helps us grow healthy bones. You might invite parent or family member or community members into the classroom who work in the healthcare field to talk about how doctors fix bones or how we can eat well to have healthy bones. We can partner with children to make a cardboard box X-ray machine for the pretend play area. We can notice animals outside that might have a skeleton. All easy ways of, again, raising this vocabulary and concepts across the day. And then finally, the last practice is walking together with families. What we do in the classroom is amazing, but what happens at home is equally, if not more important. The research is really clear that home-based math play and parental engagement in science activities is associated with positive STEM attitudes and children's knowledge as they enter school, children's knowledge in STEM topics as they enter school. So in order to invite parents into our curriculum, what we did is create a resource for every unit that can go home with parents. And you can do this in any way. You can email parents, send a note in the app. It doesn't have to be a handout, but always in the back of your mind, be thinking, for this activity, what could families do at home? So for our shadows activity, one of the things children do is they go outside at recess and they trace the shadow of a teddy bear or other familiar object. The take-home resource for parents is for parents and children to go outside and play with their shadows, make their shadows dance. We can also, at bedtime, when the night light is on, create shadow puppets as part of our bedtime routine. So once again, you can download all of the math activities at 0to3.org problem solvers. And if you're interested for when the science and engineering activities come out, you can email me at 0to3 to join the mailing list. This picture, by the way, is from our paper making activity. And I would love it if you stayed in touch with me and just shared more about your STEM journey and how you're using early math, science, and engineering activities in your classrooms, in your settings, and then your curricula for teacher preparation. And I'm always here if you want to brainstorm or ideate. This is such a source of passion and joy for me. I hope, if anything, that has come through. So I am going to stop sharing now. And perhaps, Aletheia, we could take questions and it doesn't have to be a question. If you have a reflection or a success or an idea that you'd like to share or an activity that worked really well, I think, we can really think about this group as a community of practice where we can support one another's work. So feel free. Okay.
So we will open
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah, so I think we have actually from another Rebecca, great name. Is it too early to build a specific STEM identity in children? Will it limit them from exploring other identities? And I think that's such a sensitive and insightful question. I think the answer is probably that at this age, it's so rare for children historically to have been exposed to STEM. And, I know American culture best because I grew up in it. But in American culture, there are some groups of children of color and children living in poverty who have historically been excluded from challenging STEM curricula. And we are really working to change that as a community and as a nation. That I think the effort here is to give children the opportunity to develop a STEM identity rather than to have it be unchangeable. More, it's to let them know that it's an opportunity, that this can be who they are as well, if that makes sense.
Thank you for the questions, and we would really love for them to keep coming in. So as you are sitting with the inspiring presentation we've just heard Rebecca take us through and all the ideas that she sparked, if anything is on your mind or striking your interest, you can pop that in chat or raise your hand so we know you've got something that you'd like to say or ask questions about, and we really love to hear from you. So as they get some thoughts settled, I've got a question. Rebecca.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, how much of the activities that you're sharing, how much of that is questions that are asked by the adults, bringing the activity to the children's spaces, and how much of that is listening to the questions that the children are asking and going with their curiosities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really finding that balance is so important because, to some extent, children do have some understandings like we saw in the video, but they also benefit from new knowledge as well. And so I think that what we try to do in the curriculum is offer a learning experience and some questions to provoke children's thinking. And then what we do then is listen and observe to what they're doing and saying themselves so that we can then offer coaching, offer new ideas, or offer follow-up questions to help them go deeper into the subject matter. Yeah. And actually, it's very interesting because we did a small evaluation of the math component of the curriculum. And when I say small, we had about 100 2.5 to 4-year-old students in the intervention group and about 30 students in the control group. And we found that when teachers implemented the curriculum with fidelity, kind of using a play-based approach that had a lot of discussion and questions back and forth, that we saw more significant growth in math skills in the children. So I'm hopeful, based on this very small study, that this approach is one that's powerful and effective. So Sheila had a great question about setting up a STEAM space in the classroom. And I think, that I really believe that a STEAM space has to be one that is changing over time. That it can't be a static space. So thinking about, okay, in the first, month or two of school, what kinds of topics do we want to cover in that first couple of months? And then in the STEAM space for that first couple of months, having related materials. We often suggest that for the activities that you're doing, a lot of them are games or, other things like the number line. We really suggest making that an option for free play so that children can kind of seek out, because we know repetition is kind of boring for adults, but children thrive with repetition, right? Because they need lots of repetition to kind of concretize the connections in their brains. But also, once they master it, repeatedly demonstrating mastery feels really good and makes us feel confident. So I would say do some advanced planning and refresh that STEAM area every 2 to 3 months based on the activities that you plan to cover. Let me see.
Yeah, we've got lots of nice questions coming in.
Yeah. And so I guess the next question, it looks like, is kind of differentiating STEAM from STEM. And, you know, I think we probably could have called our curriculum STEAM because we embed a lot of art into our curriculum. But I think the major difference is when we include art, the way it was described to me by an amazing researcher is he really felt that STEAM is not when we help children make a butterfly out of a clothespin and tissue paper. That is not STEAM. That is an art activity, which is fine. STEAM is when we do art in service of deep science learning. And so an example of that from our curriculum is when we have children using a magnifying glass, using their own hands, touching the tree, and then drawing an accurate portrayal to the extent that they can at that age of what they're seeing. And then using that picture as a guide for creating a model of a tree back in the classroom. So it's really using that art activity in service of a deeper science objective. And that's how I would differentiate STEAM from STEM. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. How do we conduct STEM activities or lessons for children under 3? Is it in a more teacher-directed way, or do we stick to more basic math concepts? You know, I think under 3, you know, I went to an amazing conference session on this recently where they talked about young toddler STEM learning, and it was really very interesting because it was very much about sensory exploration. They had, for example, they had tops where they just had young toddlers exploring tops. And so are they learning the physics of how a top works? No, but they are exploring the cause and effect of how this object operates, how it works, how do I make it work? And so, you know, I think that is a really different and more challenging way of introducing early STEM. And I would love, you know, I'm not sure how easily we can follow up with you, Ms. Lee, but I can send some resources your way. Also, at the very end of my PowerPoint, there are some resources, and one of them is a book called Developmental Pathways for Infants and Toddlers, and they talk about how to do early math for infants and toddlers, and I'd really recommend their book. Let me see. How would we seek advice on how to determine if an activity is age appropriate? You know, first, I would always ground myself in what's expected typically. And in my slideshow, the very last slide, and if you'd like, Aletheia, I can send it in a PDF form so you could potentially share with participants. But the final slide, and actually as footnotes early on in my slideshow, I do have some wonderful resources that you can go to that we use in the United States. And like I said, you all have a framework as well, but you know, of how to think about early math objectives. And there are now, for math at least, we know what to expect from 2 onward. And there are books, and there's actually lots of free resources too that I could point you to. In terms of science and engineering, it's a little trickier. The research is just not there yet. And so what we did for our curriculum is we looked at, it's called the Next Generation Science Standards freely available if you Google that phrase, Next Generation Science Standards. I'll put it in the chat. But what we did in the curriculum is look at the Next Generation Science Standards for 5-year-olds, which is when children in the US enter formal schooling. And then we took those standards and we translated them down to what we felt would be appropriate for preschoolers. And then hopefully over the next 5 to 10 years, the research will catch up and we'll be able to have kind of a evidence-based, standardized set of outcomes for that preschool age range.
So there are also a theme of questions coming in from Cecilia and from Nura Melina about how to support children who either may not know how to ask certain questions or do not feel so confident in testing those ideas out in a group where others might be more knowledgeable about the area that we are investigating or experimenting. So
yeah. So I think, what that's really getting at is to some extent temperament. And we know temperament has such an impact on learning, because if a child has a more slow to warm up temperament or a shyer temperament, we know that they're going to be less likely to jump in and less likely to take, risks, if you will, to try something new. And so I think that's where kind of a partner activity might work. I think you could also do some differentiation. So for example, in a card game, you might put an easier card, like the 1 egg card, at the top and give that child the first turn so that that they're going to get, the easiest card and that they will experience success right away. And that hopefully that will build their confidence that when it comes around to them again, they will kind of approach it in a more positive way. I also think that a lot of times children 4 and under don't ask questions in words. They ask questions with their gaze. They ask questions with their facial expressions. They ask questions by what they touch and what they move on the table. And so noticing that aloud, like, oh, I see you touching the roots of the plant. I wonder what they feel like on your fingers. Do they feel soft or do they feel a little bumpy? So I think we can begin to sort of notice what they're curious about and perhaps put into words what they might be asking. So those are a few strategies that just immediately come to mind, but I really invite the other, 100 experts on the call to share their ideas too.
okay. Thank you for the questions so far, and perhaps we might sit with one last one before we finish off this presentation. And I've got a feedback, so linger please as well. We've got some feedback we'd like to hear from you. And I'm sitting maybe as we take away for the rest of the weekend this question from Rebecca, but also just encouraging all of us as we prepare ourselves to bring STEM experiences and learning to the classrooms. How much of it is us also requiring some basic understanding of the engineering or the science ideas as we step into spaces and support children's curiosities and questions around it? So with engineering, if it requires some basic mechanics of engineering, sitting with Rebecca's question here, how much of that is us preparing ourselves as well?
Mm-hmm. We struggled with that a lot when we were writing, because for some of these topics, the teachers need to bring some knowledge too, right? Even if it's basic knowledge appropriate for a toddler or preschooler. So what we tried to do is, if there was special knowledge necessary to run the activity, we tried to provide that in a teacher's note or in a sidebar. So teachers would have that information right there. But as you're designing activities, I have to be honest with you all. When I wrote the shadows activity, I had to Google what is a shadow? Like, what is a shadow? I mean, we all know what it is, but how do you describe it to a young child? And so I think for all of us, I just want to, when we talk about normalizing mistakes, I want to kind of normalize my own lack of knowledge that, you know, when we are designing curricula for young children, a lot of times that's going to spark our own curiosity. And we might need to do some initial research ourselves so that we have the foundational knowledge so that we can introduce these concepts in not just an accurate way, but in a compelling and engaging way for young children. I'm also sharing the book that I mentioned for infants and toddlers in the chat. And let's see, I'm going to try and put in another resource for you all. Let me see. But was there any final, anything I could answer for you all as a final moment together?
Rebecca, can I ask a question? It's
Yes.
regarding mixed group. I think I'm building on
Yes.
one of the questions because you showed an example of a collaboration between different age groups. How do we make that happen? Because there could be some a task that could be challenging for a 5-year-old, but could be quite overwhelming for a 3-year-old if you mix them together. Yeah. Some thoughts about mixed age?
Yeah, you know, I personally think mixed age can be tricky for the very reasons that you say. I think that there can be the way to approach it is to make sure that the small groups that we're building, right? We might want to keep ages together to initially introduce the topic, right? Or initially to do the activity so that children are able to build a foundation of knowledge at their developmental level. And then, you know, I'm a big believer, and what we recommend in the curriculum is that these activities are not one and done. Like, oh, I did the activity this week, check, we're done. We recommend doing the activities at least 3 times a week. And teachers told us they felt the activities flowed best, like doing them for 2 weeks. And children didn't get bored, they just got better. So as children are developing more confidence and more mastery, then we can create increasingly mixed groups. And often the older children are then mentoring the younger children, but it's really important to make sure that everyone has a chance to build some foundational knowledge. And that can sometimes be done in carefully constructed groups. And I say that because you might have a 5-year-old whose development looks more like a 3-year-old. So as a teacher, you're kind of constructing those groups based on the way that you know children best.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. And so just as we come up to 10:30, I think that's all the time we have for this morning's public lecture. Once again, we'd like to thank Rebecca really for all the time and energy that you've brought to this presentation to inspire us and to just spark our interest in STEM in our own lives as well now, as well as how we bring it to our professional practice. I am going to put up on the screen a slide for our audience to share their feedback with us as you're finishing off with this lecture and this learning hour with us so that we can hear and learn from you, and it will benefit all of us, I'm sure. So if you can take some time to fill up that feedback form as you step out of this space, we will appreciate that very much. And we will linger on, I will linger on for sure, to have some conversations with anyone else who might want to. Rebecca, if you'd like to stay on just a little bit more as well.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
in the event that someone else might have some thoughts they want to share directly with you. If
Yeah.
not, thank you very much for being here and spending your Saturday morning with us. We've now come to the end of our ECE public lecture. Thank you for being here, and we wish you a fabulous weekend ahead.
Thank you for having me, everyone. I've so enjoyed being with you all.